I am Cheryl Richardson, 38 years old, and today I want to share how my parents laughed in my face when I expressed interest in buying into their prestigious medical practice. The irony. They had no idea I was already the chief medical officer of Memorial Hospital, which was in the process of acquiring their practice. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. If you are watching this video, let me know where you are viewing from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stay tuned to see how I turned years of family rejection into my greatest professional triumph. Growing up as a Richardson meant living under the constant weight of 3 generations of medical excellence. Our family name was synonymous with healthcare in our community, a legacy my parents reminded me of at every opportunity. My father, Dr. James Richardson, was a renowned internist whose patient waiting list stretched months ahead. My mother, Dr. Margaret Richardson, built an equally impressive reputation as a gynecologist who delivered half the babies in our affluent suburb. From my earliest memories, there was never any question about my future. The path had been predetermined before I could even pronounce stethoscope. My bedroom walls were not decorated with posters of musicians or movie stars, but with framed medical degrees and anatomical charts. My parents gifted me toy doctor kits, while other kids received dolls and building blocks. "Medicine is in your blood, Cheryl," my father would say, during our formal family dinners. The Richardson name carries responsibilities. Those dinners were like miniature medical conferences. Dad would discuss challenging cases, Mom would share surgical techniques, and I would sit there trying desperately to contribute something meaningful to earn their approving nods. But no matter how much I studied, or how many medical terms I memorized, it never seemed enough. My older brother Thomas, however, fit perfectly into their vision. 4 years, my senior Thomas displayed an early aptitude for science and an easy charm with patients during the high school shadow days at our parents' practice. They welcomed him into their professional circle, with open arms grooming him for partnership from the moment he entered medical school. "Thomas understands what it means to be a Richardson," my mother would say, the implication clear that I somehow did not. Our family practice occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming medical building my grandfather had built. Richardson Family Medicine was the crown jewel of local health care, with plush waiting rooms, state-of-the-art equipment, and a clientele that included the wealthiest families in the region. When I was 16, I started working there as a receptionist during summer breaks, hoping to impress my parents with my dedication. Despite the pressure and constant comparison to Thomas, I genuinely loved medicine. The intersection of science, technology, and human compassion fascinated me. I excelled in my science classes and volunteered at community health clinics, but something felt off about following exactly in my parents' footsteps. While they focused exclusively on treating symptoms and diseases, I found myself drawn to the systems that delivered that care, the administration that made it possible, and the business models that sustained it. During my senior year of high school, I shadowed the hospital administrator during a career day program. The experience was revelatory. Here was the hidden infrastructure that allowed doctors like my parents to practice medicine. Here were decisions being made about resource allocation, access to care, and healthcare innovation that affected thousands of lives. This was where I could make my own mark in medicine, distinct but complementary to the clinical legacy of my family. I kept these thoughts to myself, knowing they would be dismissed at home. Instead, I dutifully applied to the pre-med programs my parents had selected, was accepted to my father's alma mater, and prepared to follow the path that had been laid out for me. But the seed of a different dream had been planted, and it would soon grow into a decision that would fracture our family for years to come. The breaking point came during my junior year of college. After 2.5 years of organic chemistry biology labs and MCAT prep courses, I could no longer ignore the growing certainty that I wanted to approach medicine from a different angle. One weekend home during spring break, I gathered my courage and announced at dinner that I wanted to switch my focus to healthcare management and administration. The silence that followed was deafening. My father set down his fork with deliberate slowness, his face flushing with anger. My mother stared at me as though I had just announced I was dropping out to join the circus. "That is not medicine," my father finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That is paperwork. Richardsons are healers, not paper pushers." But Dad, healthcare administrators design the very systems that allow doctors to practice effectively. I tried to explain. They improve patient outcomes on a systemic level. Enough, he interrupted, slamming his hand on the table, hard enough to make the water glasses jump. "This is about you lacking the discipline for medical school, isn't it? You want the easy way out." My mother joined in her disappointment, perhaps even more cutting than my father's anger. "We have invested everything in preparing you for medical school, Cheryl. The connections we have made, the recommendations we have secured, and now you want to throw it all away to become some sort of glorified secretary." The argument escalated from there, with painful words exchanged on both sides. By the end of the evening, my father had made his position crystal clear. If I abandoned the path to becoming a practicing physician, I would do so without their financial support. My mother, tears in her eyes, accused me of betraying not just them, but generations of Richardsons, who had built our family name in medicine. That night I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the medical textbooks and anatomical posters my parents had given me over the years, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The next morning, I returned to campus early, my decision made, but my heart heavy with the knowledge of what it would cost me. True to their word, my parents immediately cut off my tuition payments and living allowance. At 20 years old, I suddenly found myself scrambling to secure emergency student loans and taking on multiple campus jobs to stay afloat. My previously comfortable college experience transformed overnight into a stressful juggling act of work, study, and financial anxiety. Communication with my family became minimal and strained. Holiday visits were tense affairs, where we carefully avoided discussing my education or career plans. Thomas, now in his second year of medical school, attempted to mediate but ultimately sided with our parents' vision of what a Richardson should be. "They just want what is best for you, Cheryl," he told me during one phone call. "Maybe you should reconsider. It is not too late to get back on track for med school." But I remained firm in my conviction, channeling my hurt into determination. I changed my major to healthcare management, added business administration as a second concentration, and threw myself into my new path with everything I had. My grades, already strong, became exceptional, as I found myself genuinely passionate about my coursework in ways I had never been about organic chemistry or cellular biology. During my senior year, I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Eleanor Winters, the visiting lecturer for a healthcare innovation seminar. Dr. Winters was everything I aspired to be: a physician who had transitioned into healthcare administration and was now the CEO of a regional hospital network. After my passionate contribution to a class discussion about improving emergency department efficiency, she asked me to stay after class. "You have a unique perspective, Cheryl," she said, studying me with keen interest. "You understand both the clinical and administrative sides of healthcare. That is surprisingly rare and incredibly valuable." When I hesitantly shared my family situation, expecting judgment, I instead found understanding and encouragement. Dr. Winters became my mentor, helping me secure a prestigious internship at a local hospital for my final semester. That internship was transformative. For the first time, I was in an environment where my ideas about healthcare delivery were valued rather than dismissed. I worked directly with hospital administrators who saw the potential in my background and perspective. I developed my first quality improvement project, a streamlined intake process that reduced emergency room wait times by 22% in a pilot program. As graduation approached, with no family members planning to attend the ceremony, I found myself at another crossroads. But this time, instead of doubt and fear, I felt a growing confidence in the path I had chosen. I was developing my own vision for how healthcare could be more efficient, accessible, and patient-centered, and I was determined to make that vision a reality, with or without the Richardson name behind me. With Dr. Winters as a reference, I was accepted into a highly competitive healthcare administration master's program combined with an MBA. I worked as a graduate assistant to cover expenses and took out more student loans determined to invest in my future, despite the financial strain. Every semester, I sent my grades and achievements home, hoping for some acknowledgement, but received only brief formal responses in return. I graduated at the top of my class with dual master's degrees and multiple job offers. Following Dr. Winters' advice, I accepted a position at Memorial Hospital, a large teaching institution in a city 3 hours from my hometown, as part of their administrative fellowship program. The 2-year fellowship was designed to groom future healthcare executives by rotating them through various hospital departments and management roles. I threw myself into each new assignment with both the work ethic my parents had instilled in me and the innovative thinking they had discouraged. My final fellowship project, a redesign of the hospital's outpatient scheduling system, caught the attention of the executive team when it reduced no-show rates by 30% and increased revenue by over $2 million in its first year. "You have a gift for seeing both the forest and the trees," the chief operating officer told me during my fellowship evaluation. "You understand the clinical implications of administrative decisions, which makes you invaluable." When the fellowship ended, I was offered a permanent position as Director of Outpatient Services, an unusually high-level role for someone my age. The next 5 years were a blur of 60-hour work weeks, challenging projects, and steadily increasing responsibilities. I encountered resistance from older physicians who resented taking direction from a young administrator, especially a female one, but I won them over one by one with data-driven results and genuine respect for their clinical expertise. By 30, I had been promoted to Associate Chief Operating Officer, overseeing multiple service lines and hundreds of staff members. By 33, I became the youngest Chief Operating Officer in Memorial Hospital's history. My leadership style combined rigorous fiscal management with an unwavering focus on quality care and staff well-being, a balance that earned me both respect and results. Throughout this time, I maintained minimal contact with my family. They knew I was working in healthcare administration, but seemed to deliberately avoid learning specifics about my career progression. During rare holiday visits, when asked about my work, I would give vague answers about being at Memorial Hospital, allowing them to assume I held a middle management position rather than correcting their misconception. In my personal life, I remained intensely private, channeling most of my energy into my career. The few relationships I attempted often faltered under the weight of my work schedule and emotional unavailability. My closest friend became Michael Carter Memorial Hospital's legal counsel, who understood the demands of hospital leadership and provided both professional collaboration and genuine friendship. With Michael's legal guidance, I spearheaded the hospital's community benefit programs, establishing free clinics in underserved neighborhoods and developing partnerships with local schools for health education initiatives. These programs not only fulfilled regulatory requirements, but became a source of personal fulfillment, allowing me to connect healthcare delivery with social impact in ways my parents' practice never had. At 36, when Memorial Hospital's chief executive officer announced his retirement, I was encouraged to apply for the position. The interview process was grueling, with presentations to the Board of Trustees and skeptical questions about my relative youth. But my track record of financial and quality improvements, combined with my vision for the hospital's future, ultimately won them over. The day I received the official offer to become Chief Executive Officer and Chief Medical Officer of Memorial Hospital was the proudest of my career. I called Michael first, then Dr. Winters, who had remained a mentor throughout my journey. "I always knew you would go far, but even I am impressed by your timeline," Dr. Winters said. "Have you told your family yet?" I had not. Despite my professional success, or perhaps because of it, the gulf between my parents and me had only widened with time. Thomas had joined our parents' practice as planned, and was now being groomed to take it over eventually. Our interactions had become perfunctory holiday calls and obligatory birthday cards. They still think I made the wrong choice, I told Dr. Winters. Telling them I am running a hospital would just feel like I am trying to prove something. So, I kept my achievement to myself, taking the helm of Memorial Hospital at 37 years old, with a staff of 2,000 and an annual operating budget of $500 million. My first year as CEO brought both challenges and triumphs, including navigating a difficult electronic health record implementation and securing a prestigious National Quality Award. It was during a strategic planning retreat with my executive team that the path of my career would unexpectedly intersect with my family history, setting the stage for a confrontation I had never anticipated. As part of Memorial Hospital's 5-year strategic plan, I had initiated an aggressive growth strategy that included acquiring smaller healthcare facilities throughout the region. Our goal was to create an integrated healthcare network that could provide seamless care across the continuum while achieving economies of scale. Jessica Lawson, my trusted Chief Strategy Officer, presented a list of potential acquisition targets during our quarterly planning meeting. We have identified 15 independent medical practices that align with our growth criteria, she explained, as we reviewed the spreadsheet together. Most are primary care groups looking for the stability of hospital affiliation as reimbursement models change. I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw Richardson Family Medicine listed among the potential acquisitions. My parents' practice, the medical dynasty I had been deemed unworthy to join, was apparently now looking to be acquired. "What is the financial situation with this one?" I asked Jessica, trying to keep my voice neutral as I pointed to my family name on the screen. "Actually, it is one of the more interesting cases," she replied, pulling up a detailed financial analysis. Richardson Family Medicine has an excellent reputation and strong patient base, but their financial management has been surprisingly poor. Their overhead is excessive, their billing practices outdated, and they have made several questionable equipment investments. They are cash-rich, but operationally inefficient, and their market share has been steadily declining for the past 3 years as younger patients choose more modern practices. The irony was almost too perfect. The very skills my parents had dismissed, the administrative and business acumen they had considered beneath the dignity of a Richardson, were precisely what their practice now desperately needed. I excused myself from the meeting and retreated to my office, needing time to process this unexpected development. My first instinct was to recuse myself from any decisions regarding Richardson Family Medicine, to disclose my conflict of interest, and step away. But another part of me, the wounded daughter, who had been rejected and dismissed, wanted to be directly involved. After careful consideration and a lengthy discussion with Michael about the legal and ethical implications, I decided on a middle path. I would not disclose my relationship immediately, but would ensure the acquisition decision was made based entirely on business merit, with extra scrutiny from the board to avoid even the appearance of personal bias. The due diligence process revealed even more problems at my parents' practice than initially apparent. Their refusal to adopt modern electronic health records had created inefficiencies throughout their system. Their compensation model heavily favored the senior physicians, my parents, at the expense of younger associates who were leaving at an alarming rate. Their patient satisfaction scores, once the highest in the region, had dropped significantly as they failed to adapt to changing patient expectations. In a painful moment of clarity, I realized that the practice that had been held up as the pinnacle of medical excellence throughout my childhood was now a cautionary tale of what happens when prestige is prioritized over progress. The Richardson way of doing things, which I had been told was the only right way, was now proving unsustainable in a changing healthcare landscape. The acquisition committee ultimately recommended proceeding with an offer for Richardson Family Medicine, citing its strong brand, valuable location, and potential for rapid improvement under proper management. When the recommendation came to me for final approval, I signed off without allowing myself to dwell on the personal implications. The next phase would typically involve our integration team handling negotiations and transition planning, but in this case I made an unusual request. I want to personally lead the integration of Richardson Family Medicine, I told Jessica during our next one-on-one meeting. She looked surprised. That is several levels below your pay grade, Cheryl. We have an entire team that handles practice acquisitions. This one is special, I said carefully. It has a unique culture and reputation in the community. I want to ensure we preserve what works while addressing the operational issues. What I did not say was that I needed to be the one to face my parents across the negotiation table. After 15 years of estrangement and underestimation, I would finally reveal what I had built while they were dismissing my choices. It would be difficult and emotionally complex, but necessary for both professional and personal closure. As the acquisition process moved forward and a meeting was scheduled with the Richardson Family Medicine leadership team, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. The conference room on the top floor of Memorial Hospital would soon become the setting for a family reunion, unlike any other, and a reckoning 15 years in the making. The morning of the meeting with Richardson Family Medicine, I stood in my office bathroom staring at my reflection as I applied a final touch of lipstick. At 38, I barely resembled the uncertain college student who had last stood up to her parents. My wardrobe of designer suits had replaced the bargain clothes of my financially struggling years. The confidence of running a major hospital had replaced my former need for parental approval. "They won't recognize you," Michael said when he stopped by my office to wish me luck. "Not just physically, but who you have become." I had instructed our administrative team not to reveal my name or position to the Richardson representatives ahead of the meeting. The preliminary discussions had been handled by Jessica, and our acquisition team with me, referred to only as hospital leadership, who would be present for the final negotiation. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Michael asked. "I could still step in for you." I shook my head. This is something I need to do myself. As I gathered my materials and headed toward the executive conference room, I felt oddly calm. Years of leading difficult negotiations and high-stakes meetings had prepared me for this moment, even if none had been quite so personal. The Richardson contingent was already seated when I entered my parents at the head of the table with Thomas beside them. There were also two younger doctors I did not recognize, presumably newer partners in the practice. For a brief moment, no one looked up from their papers, giving me a chance to observe them unnoticed. My father had aged considerably, his once dark hair now completely silver, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. My mother looked more preserved, but tense, her posture rigid as she reviewed documents through reading glasses. Thomas, now 42, had grown to look remarkably like our father, down to the expression of contained impatience. "Good morning," I said, as I closed the door behind me. "Thank you all for coming today." 5 heads turned toward me simultaneously. I watched as confusion, then shock, registered on my parents' faces. Thomas' mouth actually fell open. The two younger doctors, oblivious to the family drama unfolding, merely looked politely attentive. "Cheryl," my mother finally managed her voice, barely above a whisper. "Dr. Richardson," I corrected, professionally setting my portfolio on the table. "Chief Medical Officer and Chief Executive Officer of Memorial Hospital. It has been a while." My father recovered first, his expression shifting from shock to immediate skepticism. "What is this? Some kind of joke? Where is the hospital administrator we are supposed to be meeting with?" "You are looking at her," I replied, calmly taking my seat at the opposite end of the table. "I have been with Memorial for 15 years, the last 18 months as CEO. But today is not about my career path. We are here to discuss the potential acquisition of Richardson Family Medicine by our hospital network." The younger doctors glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "This is ridiculous," my father blustered, starting to stand. "We came here for a serious business discussion, not some kind of family ambush." "Dr. Richardson," I said, firmly using his professional title rather than calling him Dad, This is absolutely a serious business discussion. Your practice has approached our hospital about acquisition, and as CEO, all such decisions ultimately require my approval. Now, shall we proceed professionally, or would you prefer to reschedule when you are feeling more composed? The subtle power shift was palpable in the room. For the first time in my life, I was not the supplicant in our relationship. My father slowly sat back down, visibly struggling to reconcile his daughter with the executive controlling the fate of his practice. We proceeded through the preliminary discussions with artificial professionalism, reviewing the valuation reports and integration timelines prepared by our teams. I maintained a detached business-like demeanor while presenting our analysis of Richardson Family Medicine's strengths and weaknesses. As you can see from these projections, I explained, pointing to a graph on the screen, your practice has experienced a 28% decline in new patient acquisition over the past 5 years, while operating costs have increased by 35%. Your accounts receivable cycle is nearly twice the industry standard, and your electronic records implementation is significantly behind schedule. My mother flinched at each point while my father grew increasingly defensive. Our practice has provided exceptional care for over 30 years, he interjected. These business metrics hardly capture the quality of medicine we practice. On the contrary, I countered, patient satisfaction scores tell us quite a bit about care quality, and yours have been declining for 6 consecutive quarters. I slid a report across the table. What these numbers tell us is that Richardson Family Medicine remains a respected institution with strong potential but requires significant operational modernization to remain competitive. After 2 hours of detailed discussion, we reached the critical point of the negotiation, the financial terms of the acquisition. Based on our analysis, I concluded Memorial Hospital is prepared to offer the following purchase terms. I outlined a fair but not overly generous offer that reflected the true value of the practice rather than its inflated self-image. The room fell silent as my parents and the other physicians reviewed the numbers. Thomas was the first to speak. This seems reasonable, based on current market conditions, he said cautiously, earning a sharp look from our father. It is insulting, my father countered. You are undervaluing decades of reputation and patient goodwill. I remained impassive. The offer reflects the actual financial performance of the practice, not its historical reputation. However, we do value the Richardson brand and legacy, which is why we are offering to retain the name and current physician leadership for a transitional period. My father scoffed. A transitional period, so you can eventually push us out of our own practice. That is standard in acquisitions of this nature, I explained. But I would be open to discussing alternatives if you have a counter-proposal. A thought seemed to occur to my father then, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. Actually, we do have an alternative to consider. Perhaps instead of an outright acquisition, your hospital might consider bringing on a partner who could help modernize our operations while maintaining our independence. I raised an eyebrow, immediately seeing where this was heading. And who would you suggest for such a role? My father gestured toward me with affected casualness. Well, you do seem to have developed some administrative skills. Perhaps you might consider buying into the practice, say, a 20% share to start. You could apply whatever corporate methods you have learned while we maintain clinical control. The audacity was breathtaking. After 15 years of estrangement, after dismissing my career choices and cutting me off financially, he was now attempting to use our family connection to secure a better deal and avoid the full acquisition. Are you offering me a position in the family practice, Dr. Richardson? I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. My father shrugged. It seems a natural solution. You get to finally join the Richardson medical tradition, and we get your administrative expertise. The slight pause before administrative conveyed all his lingering disdain for my chosen career path. I see. And what would such a buy-in cost? He named a figure so inflated, it would have been laughable in any context, but in this one it was deeply revealing. He still did not believe I could afford it. He still saw me as the struggling student he had cut off, not as the successful executive I had become. That is an interesting proposal, I said, allowing a brief pause. Unfortunately, I think you misunderstand my position and resources. My father waved dismissively. I realize the buy-in might be beyond your means right now, but perhaps the hospital could fund it as part of your compensation package. The condescension in his tone was the final straw. 15 years of dismissal, underestimation, and emotional distance crystallized into a single moment of clarity. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I had prepared for this very possibility. Actually, Dr. Richardson, I said calmly, I believe you are operating under several misconceptions. First, as Chief Medical Officer of this hospital, I already have full clinical privileges that far exceed what your practice could offer me. Second, as Chief Executive Officer, I do not need to buy into your practice. I turned the laptop to face him. Memorial Hospital already owns it. I pushed the document toward him, a copy of the preliminary acquisition agreement his practice administrator had signed the previous week. This is not a negotiation about whether Memorial will acquire Richardson Family Medicine. That decision has already been made by your board. This meeting is merely to discuss transition details and leadership structure moving forward. The blood drained from my father's face as he stared at the document, the reality of the situation finally dawning on him. My mother gasped audibly. Thomas looked between us with wide eyes, witnessing the complete reversal of the power dynamic that had defined our family for decades. As of next month, I continued into the stunned silence, Richardson Family Medicine will become a wholly owned subsidiary of Memorial Hospital. And as CEO, I will have final authority over all operational decisions, including staffing compensation and clinical privileges. I closed my laptop with a decisive click that echoed in the silent room. Now, shall we discuss how you would like to proceed with the transition? The aftermath of that revelation was as dramatic as you might expect. My father stormed out of the conference room, my mother following close behind, after throwing me a look of mingled shock and something that might have been reluctant respect. Thomas lingered awkwardly, introducing me to the two younger physicians who were still trying to process the family drama they had just witnessed. Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow, I suggested to them. This has been a lot to take in for everyone. After they left, Thomas remained studying me with new eyes. So, this is what you have been doing all these years, he said, gesturing to the hospital around us. While we thought you were just pushing papers somewhere. I built a career, I replied simply. Just not the one they wanted for me. Are you doing this for revenge? He asked directly, buying their practice to prove a point. The question gave me pause. Was there an element of vindication in my decision to personally handle this acquisition? Absolutely. But revenge? The acquisition makes sound business sense, I told him honestly. Their reputation still has value, and with proper management, the practice can thrive again. If I were motivated by revenge, I would have let it continue to decline until it collapsed under its own mismanagement. Thomas nodded slowly, seeming to accept this. They won't see it that way, you know. I know, I acknowledged, but that has been our family pattern, hasn't it? They see what they expect to see, not what is actually there. We parted with an awkward half-hug, Thomas, promising to talk to our parents and encourage them to approach the situation professionally, if not warmly. The next morning, I was surprised when my assistant announced that my parents were in the lobby requesting to speak with me. I had them shown to a smaller, more private conference room rather than my office wanting to maintain professional boundaries. They entered looking tired, but composed as if they had spent the night processing the new reality. My father predictably spoke first. We have come to discuss terms, he said stiffly, since it appears we have no choice in this acquisition. There are always choices, I replied. But yes, the acquisition will proceed. The question is whether you want to be part of the new structure or prefer to retire. My mother flinched at the word retire. but my father leaned forward. And if we stay, will you be seeking some sort of retribution for the past? The question echoed Thomas from the day before, but carried the weight of 15 years of estrangement. I took a moment before answering, wanting my words to be precise and truthful. What happened between us was personal, I said carefully. This is business. The changes I will implement at the practice are the same ones I would make regardless of who owned it. Electronic health records will be fully implemented. Billing will be centralized. Physician compensation will be restructured to reward quality outcomes, not just volume. I paused, then added, if you are asking whether I will use my position to punish you, the answer is no. That would be unprofessional and ultimately self-defeating. But I also won't protect outdated practices out of sentimentality or family connection. My mother spoke for the first time. You have changed so much, Cheryl. Become so hardened. I have become effective. I corrected her. I have built something substantial here. Something that helps thousands of patients every day. And I did it without the support or belief of the people, who should have been my biggest champions. The hurt in my voice must have been evident despite my efforts to remain professional because something in my mother's expression softened. Perhaps, she said quietly, we were wrong about some things. My father looked as if he might argue, but then surprisingly nodded. Your brother showed us some articles about you last night. Awards you have won, programs you have implemented here. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. They were impressive. It was the closest thing to an apology or admission of error I had ever received from him, and despite everything I felt a small knot of tension release in my chest. Thank you, I said simply. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the practical aspects of the transition. They had concerns about their long-term patients, their staff, their medical approach. I listened and addressed each point professionally, outlining a transition plan that would preserve what worked while updating what did not. By the end of our meeting, we had reached a functional working arrangement. They would remain with the practice for 2 years, helping with the transition and gradually reducing their patient loads as they approached retirement. Thomas would stay on as a senior physician, but would also train in administrative skills to potentially take on a leadership role within Memorial Hospital's primary care division. Before they left, my mother hesitated, then asked, will you come to dinner sometime? Not to discuss business, just as family. The question caught me off guard. 15 years of distance could not be bridged by one difficult meeting and a tentative professional truce. I am not ready for that, I admitted. Maybe someday, but not yet. She nodded, accepting my boundary with surprising grace. My father looked like he wanted to say something more, but ultimately just extended his hand for a formal handshake, which I returned. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of transition planning. I assigned a dedicated integration team to Richardson Family Medicine, but remained personally involved reviewing all major decisions. I also made a point of meeting with every staff member individually, from the newest receptionist to the most senior nurse practitioner. Many were shocked to learn I was the Richardson daughter they had heard mentioned, but never met the family black sheep who had supposedly abandoned medicine. I never abandoned medicine, I told one longtime nurse who had known me as a teenager. I just chose to serve it differently. One particularly meaningful interaction came with Dr. David Kim, a young physician who had joined the practice 2 years earlier and was growing increasingly frustrated with its outdated methods. I was planning to leave, he confessed during our meeting. The older doctors, your parents, they resist every suggestion for improvement. They keep saying the Richardson way is the only right way. I smiled at the familiar phrase. Well, there is about to be a new Richardson way, I told him, and I would like you to help shape it. Over the following months, the practice began its transformation. New systems were implemented, workflows redesigned, and the physical space itself renovated to create a more efficient, patient-friendly environment. I visited weekly sometimes, working directly alongside staff to understand their challenges and concerns. My relationship with my parents remained professional, but gradually thawed around the edges. My father, to my surprise, became more receptive to changes once he saw patient satisfaction scores improving. My mother took a particular interest in our community outreach programs, eventually volunteering to lead a women's health initiative for underserved populations. Thomas and I rebuilt our sibling bond, cautiously discovering that we had more in common as adults than we ever had as children. He began to appreciate my administrative skills, while I developed new respect for his clinical expertise. We found ourselves collaborating effectively, combining our different perspectives to improve patient care. The most challenging aspect was navigating the personal undercurrents beneath our professional interactions. Years of hurt, resentment, and misunderstanding could not be erased by business success alone. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that emerged in stressful situations, and occasional verbal missteps that reopened old wounds. But there were also moments of genuine connection and mutual respect that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Like when my father asked my opinion on a complex operational issue, genuinely valuing my expertise. Or when my mother proudly introduced me to one of her longtime patients as my daughter, the hospital CEO. Small steps, tentative rebuilding. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a pathway towards something new. Something that honored both our shared past and our separate journeys. 1 year after that fateful board meeting, Richardson Family Medicine hosted an open house to celebrate its renovation and expansion under Memorial Hospital ownership. The practice had been transformed not just physically but operationally, with modern systems, expanded services, and a renewed focus on both patient experience and staff well-being. I stood at the back of the crowded reception area, watching as my father addressed the gathering of staff, patients, and community members. He looked different somehow. The rigid authoritarianism that had defined him throughout my childhood softened into something more contemplative. For over 30 years he was saying, I believed there was only one right way to practice medicine, the Richardson way. What I failed to recognize was that the Richardson way could evolve, could expand beyond what I had envisioned. He paused, scanning the room until his eyes met mine. Sometimes it takes a new generation to show us the blind spots in our vision. It was as close to a public acknowledgement of my contribution as he had ever made, and I felt an unexpected tightness in my throat. After the speeches, as guests mingled and toured the renovated facility, my mother approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. Your father may never say it directly, she said, handing me one of the glasses, but he is proud of what you have built. We both are. Even though I never became a doctor, I could not help asking. She smiled ruefully. You became exactly what the Richardson legacy needed, Cheryl. We were just too stubborn to see it. Later that evening, I found myself alone in what had once been my father's private office, now transformed into a collaborative workspace for the physician team. Thomas found me there, leaning against the doorframe with a knowing expression. Quite a journey from being told you were too poor to buy into the practice to owning the whole thing, he observed. I laughed softly. That was never the point. Wasn't it? He asked. At least a little bit. I considered the question honestly. Maybe at first, I admitted. That moment in the boardroom, seeing Dad's face when he realized I was in charge, there was definitely some satisfaction there. But that feeling faded quickly. And what replaced it? The understanding that true success isn't about proving others wrong, I said. It's about creating something meaningful, despite the obstacles. Every time I focused on showing them they were wrong about me, I gave away my power. Real freedom came when I built something I believed in, regardless of their approval. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I have been thinking a lot about how different our paths were. I followed the blueprint they created, and never questioned it. You forged your own way against tremendous resistance. I wonder sometimes which of us was braver. Different kinds of courage, I suggested, and different kinds of challenges. In the months that followed, my relationship with my parents continued its careful evolution. We were not the warm, demonstrative family of television movies probably never would be. But we had found a new equilibrium based on professional respect that was slowly extending into our personal interactions. My father began consulting me on business decisions outside the practice. My mother and I started meeting monthly for lunch, cautiously rebuilding a relationship that had been fractured for so long. Thomas and I became true collaborators, his clinical expertise complementing my administrative vision as we developed new models of care delivery. Perhaps the most meaningful measure of change came when a young administrative intern at the hospital approached me after a leadership seminar I had conducted. "Dr. Richardson," she said hesitantly, "your father was my mother's physician for years. He told me I should speak with you about my interest in healthcare administration. He said you were the best mentor I could possibly have." The recommendation, so, at odds with the father, who had once dismissed my career choice as beneath the family dignity, was evidence of a profound transformation, not just in him, but in our entire family dynamic. The journey from rejection to recognition had been long and often painful. There had been no shortcuts, no magical moment of complete reconciliation, just steady work, professional achievement, and the slow rebuilding of trust and respect on both sides. What I learned through this process was that true healing does not require forgetting the past or pretending the hurt never happened. It requires building something new that acknowledges both the pain and the growth that came from it. It requires setting boundaries while remaining open to change. And most importantly, it requires finding your own measure of success rather than accepting someone else's definition. The deepest irony of my story is that by rejecting me, my parents set me on the path to becoming exactly what our family legacy needed to survive in a changing healthcare landscape. Had they embraced and supported my vision from the beginning, Richardson Family Medicine might have evolved, gradually adapting to new realities without crisis. Instead, their resistance forced me to build my strength and skills entirely outside their sphere of influence, returning only when I had the power to implement change on my own terms. Today, I balance my role as hospital CEO with ongoing involvement in the practice that bears my family name. We have expanded our community outreach programs, providing care to populations my parents' practice never served. We have created training opportunities for healthcare administrators alongside clinical education, recognizing that modern medicine requires both skill sets working in harmony. Most importantly, I have found peace with my own journey. The need for parental approval that once drove so many of my decisions has been replaced by confidence in my own vision and values. I still carry the Richardson name, but I have redefined what it means on my own terms. If you are watching this and struggling with family expectations that do not align with your authentic path, know that the hardest road often leads to the most meaningful destination. Your value is not determined by others' recognition of it. Success is not measured by following someone else's blueprint, but by creating something that reflects your unique gifts and vision. Have you ever had to forge your own path against family expectations? Did it eventually lead to mutual understanding? Or are you still on that journey? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the family rejection that feels like an ending can actually be the beginning of your greatest triumph. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the most powerful legacy is the one you define for yourself.